Hello, I'm Richard Payne from Holden, and I'm here at Production Gear to talk about the new Panasonic S1 camera. So the S1 is Panasonic's first full-frame camera. There are actually two versions of this. There's the S1, which I've got here, and the S1R. Now, the difference is in the resolution and the video features. The S1 is a more video-orientated camera, although it takes some pretty impressive stills as well. The S1R has got a higher resolution 47 megapixel sensor, so more for traditional photography, landscape, fashion, that sort of work. But this is the hybrid version, which will do both video and stills. So this has a 24.2 megapixel sensor, which it will read the whole full frame sensor to downsample for video at up to 25 or 30 frames a second in 4K. So a lot of the new mirrorless 4K cameras only record from a crop of the sensor, so you don't get the full width, the full size of that lovely light gathering device, but you do with the S1, so we're getting full frame 4K video out of this. So initially, it will record up to 150 megabits in MPEG-4, or there's a 72 megabits HEVC mode, which is 10-bit 420, which will record onto internal cards. You've got two cards slots here. We've got a XQD, Sony XQD slot, which will also take the recently announced CFast Express cards, and an SD card slot as well. And you can get it to put stills on one, video on the other. There are lots of ways you can configure this. So it's, as you can tell, it's a much chunkier beast, bigger in every way than I've got a GH5S next. So you can see the size comparison, and there's a weight and size comparison between them. It's a bigger camera body than you'd expect, and one of the reasons is they've put an amazing image stabilization system in it. If you have image stabilization in the lens as well as using the image stabilization within the body, you get a full 6 stops of stabilization. But even without image stabilization in the lens, you get 5.5 stops. What this means for us video users is you get an almost gimbal-like image stabilization when using it handheld. So you don't necessarily need to use a gimbal with this in a huge variety of situations. It really is remarkably good, but you've got to come and have a look at it yourself to see that sort of difference. One of the other places which Panasonic have had some questions is the screen. Whereas on a GH5S or a GH5, you've got something which you can flip around for selfie mode. So turn it through 180 degrees, this sort of free angle they call it. The S1 screen is less articulated, so we can open up to 45 degrees like that, which is good for shooting around corners or difficult situations, and we can also move it out in this direction here. But what we can't do is get that free angle that you've got on the GH5 or the 5S. However, Panasonic say this is to keep the thing strong. And this is a pro camera, so you see I'm holding it by that screen, and it can take the weight of this big lens on the front of it. It really is a very strong bracket which is holding this on, and that's why they've done it. So this is a much more professional tool. It's all weather sealed, so you can take this out in bad weather. It will work to -10 as well, so very cold situations. And because it's a full frame camera, it's a bit more power hungry. So the battery is about twice the size of the GH5 and 5S battery. So there's a new battery system that comes with it, but they're not expensive. They're about 70 or 80 pounds for the batteries. So the image quality from this full frame sensor really looks incredible. Just have a look at some of the videos shot on it on YouTube. I've shot some beautiful footage of it already. It especially shines in low light. And there's a new flat picture profile as well, which I've been using, which gives you a very naturalistic look. To grade it, you can just increase the contrast and color slightly, but it gives you a little bit more to play with in the grade. There will be a vlog update, which gives you 422 10-bit recording internally, but that's going to be an upgrade you pay a little for. So just like with the GH5, where you could buy the Vlog L update, so a Vlog Lite update for about, I think it was under £100, you'll be able to do an update. We don't know the price for it yet, but that will give you the full vlog and the 10-bit recording. Now the full vlog should unlock about 14.5 stops of dynamic range. So there's a huge dynamic range available from this large sensor. And one of the reasons is that it's a very low noise sensor. probably because the little light gathering buckets on this are about 4 times the size that they are on a GH5. So the light caper, I mean, it's basic physics. You know, you've got a bigger bucket to catch light in, it's going to look better. Full frame glass, you've got more glass to catch the light in, so the low light is going to be stunning, but that also equates to better dynamic range as well. Right, so have a look at some of the low light footage on here. I think the noise reduction can be a little aggressive, but you can dial that down. My favorite mode for shooting is the hybrid log gamma modes, which it's got, the new sort of HDR mode. And if you plug this into an HDR ready television, you can see the stuff straight away. There's also a high dynamic range stills mode it's got, using a new file format. And again, you can play these back and you can see a terrific amount of range. It's as if you've graded everything through Lightroom to compress your highlights and see the extra detail as in your skies as well as in the shadows as well. So I found that the JPEGs, the stills out of this, look remarkably good without having to fiddle with them in Lightroom. Now I'm used to playing with all my shots in Lightroom, but I think I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the extra time, because you don't appear to need to do any of the same work with stills from this as I have with my previous other cameras. Let's not go into too much detail there. So the lens I've got on it here is one of 3 lenses supplied by Panasonic to start with. Well, not supplied, you have to buy these extra, but there will be kits with these lenses. This is a 24 to 105 f4. Now initially when I heard it was an f4 constant, that didn't sound very fast to me, and I thought, oh, that sounds a little bit dull. But of course we're talking of a full frame sensor, not a crop frame like in the GH5. So that's the equivalent of a 12 to 55 f2 lens on a crop frame like a GH5 or a 5S. So that would be quite an exciting lens to play with, and this does give you the results you'd expect to get from an f2 lens on this. Also, with that extra image stabilization, as I say, we're getting this sort of gimbal steady, perfect handheld use from it. So I think for me, what is so exciting about this camera is it's the first camera I'd be very, very happy with the stills and the video from, so I could use it as a true hybrid. I've always found the stills I've got from the Micro Four Thirds system haven't quite been what I'm used to, being used to shooting with a Super 35 camera. But with this full frame, it's a huge upgrade in the sort of look of the stills you're getting from that. And being able to utilize the whole of that sensor for your video at up to 30 frames a second means that I'm able to get away with wider shots. I can use it in more confined spaces. The low light ability also gives you more flexibility. So I've got a lot of people when the GH5S came out wanted the image stabilization of the GH5 but the low light ability that the 5S gives you. With this camera we've got both. We've got that image stabilization and wonderful low light performance. So really the best thing would be to go along and see one, because one of the things you have to see to believe with this camera is how good the viewfinder is. It's a 5.7 million pixel viewfinder, an OLED viewfinder here. It is the best on the market on any camera at the moment, and that resolution is so realistic, it's so incredible. You do feel like you're looking for a mirror. In fact, it can be a little bit sharper than that and a little bit brighter than it would be if you're looking for a mirror, because it can be boosted in low light situations. So the viewfinder is amazing, and the back screen's very good too. It's not just an RGB screen, it's an RGBW. There are extra white pixels to give it a boost in brightness so it can be seen outdoors. So it's a better touchscreen on the back, but a much, much better EVF than I've seen on anything else. In terms of autofocus, the Panasonic have opted to go for their contrast-based autofocus system, and this is something they're doggedly sticking to, whereas other cameras have got dual pixel sensors so it can look at the difference between the 2 images in order to do autofocus. Panasonic are using very powerful image analysis to actually look at the image and look at that contrast. Now, contrast-based autofocus is fantastic for stills, but because it goes a little bit past the point of focus, in order to see what's the sharp contrast area on the bit of the image you want to be in focus, you can get a little bit of hunting. But this is something that they're improving with firmware updates, and in fact the autofocus with the latest update for the GH5 and 5S is actually very, very good. And what Panasonic say is, because they're able to harness the huge computer power inside this camera with this contrast-based detection, they can stop it going over the image or going over the point of focus and coming back again. They can stop this hunting by using image analysis. And it's got a very clever mode where not only will it look for people-shaped objects in your frame, so even if somebody has their back to you, it knows that it's a person you probably want to be in focus, but it will also detect animals in frame. And whether they've just flicked through an encyclopedia of animals and shown it what all animals look like in order for the computer to be able to process what's in focus, or whether they've used something more sophisticated than that, I really don't know. But it really works. I've got a black dog who, that's not a sort of Churchillian expression, he really is a black dog. And it's very hard to get focus, but the camera detects that's an animal in frame and tries to focus on his head. And it's quite remarkable considering he's a bit of a light-sucking dog. Anyway, so you've got people detection, animal detection, a new degree of intelligence in the processor for this camera. It's got a much more powerful Venus engine than anything from Panasonic previously. And normally when you put a very big sensor and a big processor in a camera, the heat dissipation becomes a big problem. But Panasonic have solved this beautifully. I've worked with one of these cameras for 4 or 5 hours. It gets delightfully warm on the bottom, but not hot. It's just a warmth through here, but it keeps a hand grip cool, so you don't really notice the heat dissipation that's going on from that sensor. And they've actually put a thin layer of carbon on the back of the sensor, which transfers the heat through that image stabilization mechanism, which has more motors than most as well, by the way, and transfers that out to the body of the camera to give it the ability to be able to record video constantly. So at high frame rates, you find there is a limit. You're limited to about 10 minutes of recording at the 180 top frame rate this can do. But at normal frame rates, you can just carry on recording as long as you like. In addition to that long length of recording, you can record 4K at 60 frames a second, but from a Super 35 size crop in the center of the sensor. So that will give you a little bit of a punch in, but you'll be able to get, with the paid for update, it will do 10-bit 422 output from the HDMI if you want to record that into an external device. So for such a relatively small package, it's giving us this amazing stabilization, this full frame video at 25 or 30 frames a second from the whole of the full frame sensor, amazing low light, decent codecs, and a very professional build quality. It really is quite a camera.